Welcome to the new sound of online radio. Welcome to the sound of Universal Broadcasting Network.
'Cause you make me feel like I've been locked out of hell.
A mix of today's hits and hard-to-find favorites, combined with the most entertaining and intriguing talk anywhere. This is your sound. This is the sound of Universal Broadcasting Network at ubnradio.com.
You're listening to The Dr. D Show about neuropsychology and well-being. Get the knowledge you must have to live a powerful, positive life. The Dr. D Show. Here for you.
Welcome, listeners, to the Dr. D Show today. It is exciting to have you with us. Today, we're going to cover two different topics. One of them is hot on the news. We will touch in the second portion of the show today the topic on the rape case coming from Stanford in the college or with a former college student. We're also going to touch on issues of what type of education might not be actually covered properly in the educational system in the United States at this point in time that may or may not contribute to some of the behaviors that we see with otherwise very fine, brilliant young men. We're also going to be touching in the first portion of the show about the topic of neurofeedback. What is neurofeedback? When do we use it? What kind of conditions can benefit from it? How does it work? And also address some of the criticism out there for neurofeedback and limitations. With that in mind, this show is psychoeducational in essence. It's not meant to replace professional mental health advice or therapy. If you do believe you suffer from a particular disorder, please do reach out to professional help. With that in mind, some of the topics that we cover are not appropriate for the younger population, such as the second portion of the show today. Hence, your discretion is advised. We are blessed to have with us a caller that will come on board who is a practitioner, longtime practitioner of neurofeedback, Mr. John Mackert. And basically we will cover the as I said, the area of neurofeedback, how it can be used, and go from there. Something that I want to encourage everyone to know, our show is rapidly growing, multiplying the size of listeners very quickly, and it is very exciting news. So I would like to thank all of you, the listeners, for being there consistently and supporting the show and tuning in, because that's what makes this all possible. Also, thank you very much. We've got some lovely comments about the topics we're covering, the information that's being shared. This is the idea of the show is to be a great public service in terms of increasing knowledge to areas that often are kept behind the fine closed doors of educational institutions, but also cover topics that are hot and significant in the area of well-being and human care. I always find that quite amazing at how much there is lack of knowledge out there. In a variety of ages and populations, etc., and especially for that information to be given to the public in a direct, clear, meaningful, and practical way. Something that I want to touch on is, as I said, is neurofeedback, because while it has been around for many years, and has been supported by research, many individuals don't really know what neurofeedback is all about. Essentially, it's important to understand that even in general terms, neurofeedback is a type of biofeedback that measures the brain waves to produce a signal that can be used as feedback to teach self-regulation of brain function. So the idea of it, when you think about feedback is getting information back. And what are we getting information about? We're getting information about basic and important processes that the body has that's supposed to be regular and regularly maintained functions of the body. When we talk about neurofeedback as us receiving information from our neurosystem about how that system works, and expect that system to work properly. The idea is that techniques can be used, or the premise of it is that techniques can be used to train the brain to function better, and hopefully by training the brain to regulate itself and function better, overall the functioning of the person will be improved, whether it is a psychological condition or a neuropsychological condition. Neurofeedback, as in contrast to biofeedback, is relatively new technique, in a way that although it has been practiced for several years, it actually is a reputable and scientifically proven technique, and individuals need to be specifically and specially trained in neurofeedback. Those would be psychotherapists, so they are already licensed to work with, typically, those will be licensed to work already with patient population. And neurofeedback has a lot to do and a lot involved with EEG, which we'll be covering as well. It is described as a gradual technique rather than a technique that is acute, or one that is intended to produce instant results. It is the expectation that the brain will have a gradual learning process, therefore taking time, focus, dedication, and persistence. The idea is that the person will need to continue with the treatment within the proper timeline in order for it to be effective. I must say that there is considerable research support to that general idea that if you want your brain to improve using one therapy or another, you should expect that you will be doing just that, gradual work over time that is consistent, and that is based on every time increasing the difficulty of what you're facing, or for sure monitoring the progress, and making sure that what is given to the person is based, or the next session that is provided to the person is based on the progress, the individual progress of the person. It is in contrast to the idea of a magical pill. Okay, I find that always an interesting phenomena, but an understandable one, of course, that when individuals suffer from one disorder or another, they are many of them are really interested in a magical pill, in something that's going to be immediate relief, an immediate solution or cure to their problem. And essentially, especially with brain mechanism and with healing that we hopefully expect to have over time, normally it doesn't work that way. Normally we need to expect that the process that we're taking is going to take time, it's going to take effort, and it's going to take consistency. I can't begin to tell you, over and over again, of how much consistency in what you do is absolutely magical. When you are consistent with treatment, there is often a developed effect that is above and beyond than just the instantaneous improvement that you see. So the most important thing that I would encourage is to understand that one has to build their progress with time, and then expect the change, although will be gradual, will be hopefully consistently developed. Now, with that in mind, I also want to mention that neurofeedback has been having research supporting it primarily for disorders such as depression, attention deficit disorder, anxiety, sleep disorders, headaches and migraines, and other emotional issues. And there are other areas where neurofeedback might help, but it's yet still need to be determined, such as autism, seizure disorders, cerebral palsy, and PTSD. That's also important to understand. Another fact is that just to make things more complicated, just because it helps one person, it doesn't mean that it's going to help another. So we need to understand that everybody's mental health, physical health, and neurological health is a combination of multiple factors, and so one has to have their expectation mitigated this way. Now, I believe we do have Mr. Makrit with us on the phone. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. What a wonderful introduction, by the way. You kind of set the stage for me gloriously on the explanation of how neurofeedback works and all the things we're currently working on. Fantastic. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. And actually, this is just only means that you're going to get more questions that are more specific on the technique. So we're good there. Now,
No problem. And I truly appreciate the setup that you gave about this is not an instantaneous, magic pill kind of approach to brain health. It is a training program that does take time for the system to reorganize and gather in and deal with the appropriate information that it's being presented with.
And it's such a crucial and important point because in my practice we use cognitive rehabilitation exercises that are based on neuropsychology, and it's the same concept where we really do see change and progress only when we understand that there is a gradual approach, and therefore the consistency and the patience has to be there in order to see results in non-invasive techniques. We're not dropping an atomic bomb on the body. We are asking for a gradual change, respecting our body when we do that.
Absolutely.
So, John, what I would like to do is briefly...
Go ahead.
I would like to briefly review your bio for the listeners, just so they know who they're listening to, and then we're going to jump right into it. John Makrit, and am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Well, you got closer than anybody that I've talked to yet. It's Makrat.
Makrat.
Exactly right.
Oh, that sounds better. Okay, Mr. Makrat is the owner of the Balanced Brain Neurofeedback Training Center in Los Angeles. After many years of being a talent representative in Hollywood, he transitioned into his current work with neurofeedback after seeing the transformative effect it had on his daughter who has autism. I definitely want to touch on that topic with you. The natural quality of the program, using the body's own signals to cue its behavior and encourage self-regulation, was very appealing and prompted him to train at the world-renowned Othmer Institute, where he continues his professional development to this day. Mr. Makrat also is a speaker. He can provide speaking engagements in corporate events, schools, conferences, etc. So with that in mind, welcome again to the show. And if you can again give it in layman's words, what is neurofeedback?
Neurofeedback, very simply, is a training of brain self-regulation. The process is, it sounds magical and mysterious, and it's actually quite simple. any system, the brain included, it seeks information in order to adapt its circumstances for best outcome. So we provide information derived from brain signaling itself. We attach sensors to the head. We derive the tiny microvoltages. We amplify them, obviously, so that we can use them, and we present them back to the brain. Well, one could, I often use the metaphor of the mirror. The screen that the people are looking at, the people are witnessing, is literally a mirror into your own internal dynamics, the ebb and flow of brain energy that happens to everyone. And what the brain has two some basic functions. Number one, it would like to operate at the least possible energy expenditure. That's evolutionarily determined. So, and concurrently with that, its primary function is to be a pattern discernment engine of sorts. It's constantly monitoring the environment for changes of pattern. And what we do with the signaling is we provide the mirror arrangement for the brain to witness its own change of state. The rapid, instantaneous changes of pattern that happen in a person's physiology are presented to them on a video screen. The content is less material than what happens to the content. It'll flicker, it'll grow or shrink in size. Something relatively obvious happens in instantaneous reaction to a change in their brain state. And what that provides for the client sitting in the chair is, A, the observation of it, and that's why the training takes a while. The brain has to understand what it's looking at. And finally it realizes, oh my goodness, that's me. I'm making those things change. And since it would just as soon not have to look at it to expend as little amount of energy as possible and not have to attend those pattern changes constantly, it makes a self-correction. And it adjusts its energy output, its microvoltage output in a particular hertz range, let's say, of brain activity to accommodate a lesser state of arousal. So this is a training in basic self-regulation skills for the brain itself. It's not cognitive. It's not a task that one needs to worry about. You sit pleasantly in a chair and watch some kind of a video content unfold before you while your brain makes the self-adjustments that it is actually designed to do. It's the way the system is designed. It normally just lacks the information. We're just here to help provide it.
Now, how did it help you? No, I think it's good. I think it gives people an idea. How did it help your daughter?
My daughter was suffering with basic self-regulation skills. She was at times a wild person. She would run across the street through traffic. She had no ability to manage the internal dynamics that were driving her to have this excess activity, whatever it might be. And it gave her a much more, and we had her, by the way, just corollarily to that, we had her on a cocktail of medications, all well-intended, antipsychotics to you name it, to anti-anxietals, trying everything to try to get this poor young girl to be able to sit quietly and attend herself and manage her state. And they weren't working, and the side effects were awful, and she just ended up as this kind of drugged-out, dopey little kid. And it caused us to go and seek out some alternative. We didn't even know what, and someone told us about neurofeedback, gratefully, and we went and tried it, and after a number of sessions, I've kind of lost track at this point. Autism is a very special subset of what we do. She started to gain self-regulation skills. And we weaned her off all of her medications, and she's off into the States. It's almost more than a decade later. And she just graduated a regular high school, and she's off to college, and her life is fairly well managed. She still has autism, so I don't want to tell anybody out in your audience this is a cure for autism. It's not. What it does is it gives the person better self-management, and that plays out in lots of different domains, from focus and attention skills to you name it, just behavioral outbursts of any sort. But that self-regulation was so profound for her that I changed my whole life to say, you know what, this is something I really am so enamored of. I'm going to go get trained, and I'm going to do this myself. It's a remarkable tool.
That's actually, the story is also amazing that you decided to change profession and go and help other people and provide other people with the same by becoming a trained person that provides that. So that's also an inspirational component by itself. But what I want to touch on is
Truthfully, I just, as a sidebar, there are hundreds of people who have similar stories in the neurofeedback community.
that's
The Optimers, upon whom I rely, they got into the neurofeedback business based on their son who was suffering with epilepsy. It was one of the early applications of neurofeedback was for epilepsy, and it's caused them to completely change their lives. So my story is not a solitary one.
Well, we always like to have more inspirational stories on this show. Now, one interesting thing that you touched on in terms of the body learning to regulate itself, and I think self-regulation is probably an underserved or deserved area in terms of coverage of psychology, and probably an area that's never touched on in pop psychology. But it's probably one of the most essential areas a human being can invest and should be investing their time, both on the physiological and then as an extension from that, cognitively, the emotional, behavioral, and overall cognitive functioning, because lack of self-regulation is one of the top issues or number one reasons why a person would fail to function in their life, in whichever domain.
Yes.
And and when you say, what I would like to touch on is the philosophical aspect of just comparing the understanding in neuropsychology when we do cognitive training of memory or executive functions or attention and concentration, or verbal or nonverbal skills. When we do that type of training, the assumption is that learning is one of the biggest processes we can capitalize on. It sounds like neurofeedback's premise is that the brain can learn, and that the brain often does learn all the time, and it can unlearn negative or undesirable processes and learn ones that are desirable.
Absolutely. I mean, this goes back to Paul Bocchi-Rita. Not to go too far in the weeds for your audience, but I mean, there have been probably hundreds of studies on learning theory, and Rosenich's work with plasticity and the ongoing dialogue that we're having in our culture now about how people learn and how do synapses wire together, the Head's law, neurons that fire together, wire together, and that can be unlearned. So, to take it to, let's say, addiction. A learned behavior for an addicted personality is not set in stone. That those mechanisms of reward for an addicted person can be unlearned, can be directed in another way. So the possibilities are endless in terms of the flexibility of the human brain to learn and relearn and unlearn bad behaviors. So I would tell anybody out there who's struggling with whatever condition, if they happen to be struggling with, the possibilities for recovery are profound. And some of the early work in neurofeedback was done actually with recovery and addiction, and the results were quite extraordinary in terms of the recovery rates, the improvement in recovery rates just by adding neurofeedback into the mix in, say, a 12-step program. The work of Peniston and Kukulski back since 20 some odd years ago now.
Well, there are a few great.
I think it's become quite common.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
No, it's become quite common now in recovery facilities to use neurofeedback as part of the treatment program.
Yes, and I think part of the reason, the main reasons, is it's non-invasive. It is not disrupting other treatments. It can work in tandem with other treatments that you're giving to the person. And ultimately, patients desire more and more non-invasive techniques to resolve their issues. And I think the severe limitations of psychopharmacology to treat so many mental health and actually neurological conditions. At best is maintaining symptoms at the minimum level, or sometimes getting rid of some symptoms, is requiring us to look at other ways of dealing with the problems that we are facing. I think part
Right.
of I think part of the problem is that there is some level of disconnect between the physician-based approach to the psychology-based approach, and often most psychologists are not trained in medicine, while medical doctors are not often well trained in psychology. So the connection between those two worlds is often lacking. The knowledge of both worlds is often lacking in both, and I think neuropsychology has actually done a better job in bridging the two, but we still have a way to go.
Absolutely.
And try to make sure that clinicians, whether they are practicing on this side of the fence or the other, medicine or psychology, need to be versed and well enough to be able to understand what both worlds have to offer. Something I wanted to talk to you about: not every condition can benefit from every therapy. It's sort of like, when my patients ask me, well, when I have some enthusiastic patients who say, well, can it cure this and this and that? And I always say, if anybody tells you what they do can cure anything, run for the hills. So neurofeedback, just like any other thing, has some areas, some conditions that we know so far it treats very well, and then some other areas maybe we haven't seen yet. What are some of the conditions that, from your experience, treatment with neurofeedback has been helpful?
I'm I'm tempted to sound like the person I shouldn't sound like, because I'm so enamored of the process. But I mean, truthfully, you start probably the center point. The original applications for neurofeedback were for seizure disorders. So if you have a family member, someone who's suffering from epilepsy, please seek out a neurofeedback provider. It's quite powerful, and that research goes back probably to the 1970s. And what they found in those early studies, the first studies they did on epilepsy, that the study participants were commenting back to the researchers that, boy, my focus and attention skills seem so much better. So ADD and ADHD became the next line of inquiry for neurofeedback studies back in the 70s and 80s. So the widening circle, once you go to ADD, ADHD, and then you go to anxiety, depression cycle. If you think of the brain as a regulatory mechanism, you can see that anxiety being the high point of excitability, and depression being the low point of excitability. If you can train the brain to manage its state more carefully about how it approaches any particular piece of environmental input coming its way, its response will be modulated better. You will be less anxious or less depressed. It's not that people get happy, people get sad. The problem is the extreme ends of that cycle are the ones we're looking to ameliorate. I think we're having a great deal of success with PTSD. I know you've got a background and have an interest in PTSD,
Mm-hmm.
and we have a huge amount of data at this point on its effectiveness in that area, and there are several outreaches. Again, for your audience, I would suggest, if you have a veteran in your family, contact homecomingforveterans.org. There's free neurofeedback available for veterans. There are several shelters here around the Southland, I think 4 at this point, that are currently offering neurofeedback services. The Haven at the Salvation Army Center in Wilshire, the Bell Shelter in Bell. There are a number of places where especially veterans can go and get help. This is something that is extremely powerful for them. It ties back to that question the comment that I made earlier about the folks struggling with addiction. The sense of well-being that a neurofeedback training program can give to somebody, can ameliorate so much tension around things like that, especially for PTSD. And since it's non-cognitive, what's offered usually for veterans is medications or exposure therapy. Those are the two traditional VA options. And here we're offering a non-cognitive approach to basic brain self-regulation, where you don't have to discuss the trauma, you don't have to discuss the things that you witnessed, in country, and you can help your brain destabilize itself and put things into a proper frame.
Yeah, no, but I'm going to
So
give you even
that's the larger.
I'm going to jump in just when
Sorry,
you
go ahead.
say non-cognitive. Sorry about disrupting here, but I'm just going to say, I'm going to give maybe even a better term than saying non-cognitive. It is, I would challenge and say it is a cognitive approach, but it's not a psychotherapeutic approach. It is not a verbal therapy or approach, but in a way, it makes a great impact on cognitive functioning. When we say cognitive, it is as physical, just as much, it's one works with the other, the mind and the body, which is the most effective way we want to see progress.
Absolutely.
Now we only have about a minute left for the topic, but I really first of all wanted to thank you very much for being on the show and giving us your knowledge about neurofeedback and what it works for. I want to let the listeners know that, as usual, you can always reach out to me. I get all kinds of requests about where to go and for information. If I know that information, I will send that to you, or I will direct you to where you can go get that type of information. But if you want to know any more information about neurofeedback, you can go on the website of our interviewee today, and we could see it under your name. Also, you can reach out to the show, and I can always connect you with John. And with that in mind, also know that whichever treatment you are going to, just remember you want all of your treatment providers to be aware that you are going through a particular type of treatment. So remember that we need to work as a team. Make sure you let your physician, psychologist, etc., whoever is working with you, know that this is what you're seeking or that this is what you're receiving. John, thank you so much for being on our show today. And I hope you're going to continue to do great work.
It is my pleasure, Dee. Thank you so much, and I really enjoyed being here, and thank your audience for tuning in.
Thank you. Blessings as well. Now, as our second topic today is going to touch on a very, very hot area of discussion that I actually received communication about it. Individual said, hey, can you touch on this topic? So absolutely. So as everyone know, and I'm going to go into some of the media facts, although the words media facts are not always correct. The media can be wrong, and sometimes is. But I'm going to pull out some information that we've got in the media based on this case. So there is a court file of a former Stanford swimmer that has been convicted of raping a woman behind a campus dumpster, which reportedly shows that he lied also to the judge about the history of drinking and drug use that he was involved with, originally describing himself as an inexperienced person in that area before sentencing. All the brouhaha that's going on about this case now has to do with the extremely short sentence that the ex-student of Stanford received. And we're going to touch on that a little bit as well. First, what I would like to do is just pay respect to the victim and her. We're going to play some of her communication to the rapist as it was given in the court case.
Your Honor, if it is all right for the majority of this statement, I would like to address the defendant directly. You don't know me, but you've been inside me, and that's why we're here today. On January 17th, 2015, it was a quiet Saturday night at home. I sat at the table with my younger sister, who was visiting for the weekend. It was my only night with her, so I had nothing better to do. Why not? There's a dumb party minutes from my house. I would go. I made silly faces. I let my guard down, drank too much liquor. Fast, not factoring in that my tolerance had significantly lowered since college. The next thing I remember, I was in a gurney in a hallway. I had dried blood and bandages on the backs of my hands and elbow. A deputy explained I had been assaulted. When I was finally allowed to use the restroom, I pulled down my hospital pants that they'd given me, and I went to pull down my underwear, and I felt nothing. The thin piece of fabric, the only thing between my vagina and anything else, was missing, and everything inside me was silenced. And then I felt pine needles scratching the back of my neck, and I started pulling them out of my hair. I thought maybe the pine needles had fallen from a tree onto my head. My brain was talking my gut into not collapsing. I was asked to sign papers that said, rape victim. And I thought, something has really happened. My clothes were confiscated and I stood naked while the nurses held a ruler to various abrasions on my body and photographed them. The three of us worked to comb the pine needles out of my hair and 6 hands to fill 1 paper bag. After a few hours of this, they let me shower. I stood there examining my body beneath the stream of water, and I decided I don't want my body anymore. I was terrified of it. I didn't know what had been in it. I wanted to take off my body like a jacket and leave it at the hospital with everything else. On that morning, all that I was told was that I had been found behind a dumpster. One day I was at work, scrolling through the news on my phone, and I came across an article. In it, I read and learned for the first time about how I was found unconscious with my hair disheveled, long necklace wrapped around my neck, bra pulled out of my dress, dress pulled off over my shoulders and pulled up above my waist, that I was butt naked all the way down to my boots, legs spread apart, and had been penetrated by a foreign object by someone I did not recognize. I learned what happened to me the same time everyone else in the world learned what happened to me. That's when the pine needles in my hair made sense. I thought, there is no way this is going to trial. There were witnesses. There was dirt in my body. He's going to settle, formally apologize, and we will both move on. Instead, I was told he hired a powerful attorney, expert witnesses, private investigators who were going to try and find details about my personal life to use against me, find loopholes in my story to invalidate me and my sister, in order to show that this sexual assault was in fact a misunderstanding. You have dragged me through this hell with you, dipped me back into that night again and again. You knocked down both our towers. I collapsed at the same time you did. Your damage was concrete, stripped of titles, degrees, enrollment. My damage was internal, unseen. I carry it with me.
Wow, very powerful. Very powerful and very painful. This is a letter that I believe every male should be at some point. Every mature male should be hearing this letter or reading it. This is education for men to understand what it feels like for a woman to be treated this way, to be treated as an object. What does it feel for a woman when she is not asked for permission to use her body, to touch her body for someone else's needs? This is a letter that gives you the feeling of understanding how it feels to be the human being behind such a horrible act. Brock Turner was a former Stanford University student. He was convicted for this act, assaulting an unconscious woman behind a dumpster on a campus. He described his actions as the product of a culture of drinking, peer pressure, and sexual promiscuity, according to his courtroom statement. This is the component that I want to touch on the most. Rape is a horrible thing. The rates of rape are now increasing, seem to be increasing all over the world. But interestingly enough, one of the articles that came out describes rape in the past few years on Stanford campuses. This is at the Daily Beast. Allegedly saying that the elite college reported 26 sexual assaults between the years of 2012, 13, and 14. 26 assault, that means roughly a rape case every 2 weeks in an elite college. Okay. The children that go to our elite colleges that we so glorify, the children that go there, and I call them children because often these young people are where parents invest their money and their effort. We're good parents, okay? Invest all their efforts into getting their child to an elite college, okay? These young people, okay, who go to these top colleges, supposed to know better. That's what every normal human being would think. That's what parents would think. When I send my young offspring to an elite college, I expect him or her to be with the best of the best. Aren't we saying that these people supposed to be the best of our country? Aren't we saying that these students supposed to be the creme de la creme? Aren't we saying that the ones that get accepted for that are good not only in intellectual capacity, in intellectual achievement, but also in character? Isn't that not what the essays that we provide for college admission supposed to detect along with the interviews that those young people go through? And yet, we are finding that an increasing numbers of those youngsters can commit heinous crimes. A rape is a heinous crime. And you've heard the description. You've heard how this young woman was found. Now, it's interesting that this offender would blame his actions as him being, or his actions being the product, listen to what he's saying, of a culture of drinking, peer pressure, and sexual promiscuity. Almost every single person that I know that has recently attended college would probably agree that this culture exists. This culture that this person describes exists. Doesn't mean that this culture is an excuse for his behavior. Doesn't mean we need to excuse people's criminal behavior based on the way that they were raised. That's an interesting question. Okay? What is he saying? Is he saying that these are the system, or that is the system of values that he was raised with? Is he saying, look, the values that I was fed, that I was involved with, is that of alcohol, peer pressure, and sexual promiscuity? Is that what we're glorifying? Well, we can begin just at look at media and look at even current teenage shows. If you watch some of the current teenage shows, you would notice what? That the level of sophistication has been reduced, that the focus on values we used to glorify, such as respect for family structure, love. When I talk about love, I talk about family love, speech that is proper, and intellectual sophistication. Those ones are hardly ever present in today's teenage shows. In fact, the shows seem to become dumber and dumber and dumber. Reading level in the United States has decreased from 8th grade level to roughly 4th grade level. We are dealing with a situation where our society has deteriorated in so very many ways that what we are feeding to our young is no education in morality. We teach them some values. We teach them some very important values like tolerance, acceptance, being open-minded in terms of race and culture. But what we're not teaching are other basic values that build a character, such as honoring and respecting your parents, such as openness about spirituality and religion, such as being respectful about your body and maintaining some level of modesty, whether you're a girl or a boy, such as understanding gender differences and respecting those, not just gender outliers or other forms of a gender identity, but simply understanding the difference between males and females and honoring that and respecting that and learning to use that in a healthy way, such as respecting a person for their internal beauty and internal value rather than their physical appearance and what they can provide to you on a physical level, such as looking at being a part of a society as a contributing member and looking at the benefit of society as a whole and not just being a selfish and entitled person. All of these values that I just mentioned significantly are lacking in our society. They are simply not taught in the educational system. Historically, as our society was moving away from religious dogma or from religious values, being concerned with the idea that we are imposing one religion or another, we also took lots of great values that come, by the way, with many major religions, vast majority of them, such as honoring family values, honoring and respecting the parents, using proper speech, respecting each other. We took all of that and we threw the baby with the bathwater. And so where would these kids get it? If they don't get it in a religious institution because we don't want to be religious or whatever the reasons people have, and they don't get it in school, and they don't get it at home, where would they get it? They just won't get it. They'll grow up not having it unless there's always the minority of those ones who naturally feel it and seek it and go and learn it or naturally develop that. But society is not made out of all the great, perfect children. It's also made of the ones that have all types of challenges, such as physical challenges, identity challenges, attitude challenges, personality challenges. And if we don't have a society that promotes good values, that promotes essential values of society on how to function and how males should treat females and females should treat males and how honorable relationships are supposed to look like, they're not going to have it. And they're going to act like animals, which is what, worse than animals, because animals mostly don't rape as far as I know. But we're talking about the fact that they become so physical, and then all you have to have is people who are under the influence. It's like a perfect storm. You got teenagers who their brain is not fully developed, who are extremely limbic, extremely emotional, who are driven by hormones and forces of sexuality, emotions, grandiosity. This is a teenager world. This is normal for them, okay? And then put them under the influence of substances, and then put them together with a sense of entitlement because they have money and a sense of self of being a successful, knowledgeable person. And you've got the perfect storm. So for all of you out there who are older than me, who are educators, teachers, parents, any one of us who doesn't have any education but is an older adult, we need to take the responsibility to teach our youth, because if we don't do that, who will? Every day we have an opportunity to teach somebody to live a better life. And I will tell you from my experience of working with young 20-year-olds who come from very affluent homes, who have everything, money and great families and access to education and great education and A's in college and scholarships and whatever not. And I have those clients in our little city of Beverly Hills. They seek and crave the real thing. Many of them seek the real thing, but they just don't have anybody to provide them with that. So with that in mind, I hope that every single one of us will take our own, in our own world, be able to do just more good in that area. And this is a topic we will touch on in the future as well. With that in mind, I want to wish all of you to have a wonderful, healthy, in mind and spirit week. And any questions, concerns, or ideas, please don't hesitate to contact me at the contact@drdgaines.com, and also at our show on our Facebook page. With that in mind, wishing you all the best and lots of blessings. Be well.
You're listening to the Dr. D Show about neuropsychology and well-being. Get the knowledge you must have to live a powerful, positive life. The Dr. D Show. Here for you.